I know what you're thinking, but no, this isn't the Swatch 50 Fathoms. Although, honestly, it is what Swatch should have made instead of that $400 piece of bioceramic plastic. It's actually the Zodiac Super SeaWolf Ceramic, which was released a few years ago. And depending on your point of view, it's either an ingenious bit of engineering from Zodiac to create a more affordable ceramic diver, or it's just a gimmick with no real point. Although, no matter which way you look at it, you gotta admit, it's got a hell of a presence, and it's a perfect summer watch, as long as it's before Labor Day. Anyway, let's get to it. Now, the full name of this one is a Super SeaWolf Ceramic Compression Diver Automatic Rubber Strap Watch. A bit lengthy, but it does tell you two things. Maybe three that Zodiac really needs to redo their website. But really, the first part here is that whole Super SeaWolf part. And that means that this design is going to be a callback to Zodiac's great divers of the 60s and 70s. Think retro skin diver. And second, that this is going to be one of Zodiac's most expensive divers with an MSRP of $17.95. And that's all thanks to that ceramic bit. Yet, the thing is, even at that price, finding a ceramic diver is pretty impressive. Ceramic divers are a bit of a high-end novelty, as they have a totally different look, they're typically lighter, and they're more scratch resistant than a normal steel diver. Typically, you're going to wind up paying at least twice that, if not more, than what the Zodiac goes for. However, the trick with all of this is that this isn't a full ceramic diver. It's more of a hybrid, as it has a standard steel core housing all the watch components, and then just a ceramic outer shell protecting everything. Think about the Seiko Arnis and the Seiko Tunas, except that outer shroud is ceramic here, which is something you can clearly see when you look at the case back. And like I said before, depending on how you look at all of this, it's either an ingenious idea giving you the best of both worlds, or just a marketing gimmick by Zodiac. However, before we get too far, let's talk specs. This ceramic SeaWolf is a 41mm with a longer lug-to-lug just over 51, meaning it is going to wear a little bit larger, just in case you couldn't tell from the overhang on my 7¼ inch wrist. Typically, I'm good with a 41mm watch, but I do prefer a slightly shorter lug-to-lug of 48. The total thickness here is just under 14, and that does include the case back and the top of the retro-inspired double-dome sapphire. And overall, I'd say that's about average for a 200-meter diver these days. At least for an entry-level diver. Typically, the more expensive the diver, the thinner they get, but not here. Although, I do have to say from the side, it doesn't look thick at all. It looks deceptively thin, as your eyes tend to focus on that white stormtrooper bits, just ignoring the steel. You only notice it's thick when you try to put on a jacket. Rounding everything out, it's also got a 20mm lug width, comes with a matching rubber strap, has a screwed down crown, ceramic bezel, and it's all powered by an STP 1-11. Which I sort of consider to be an in-house movement for Zodiac, since Fossil owns both Zodiac and STP. They're both sort of their Swiss divisions. Now, on the wrist, I think it's going to wear like you'd expect it to. Comfortable, but not too comfortable. Lightweight, but not titanium lightweight. Basically, average in terms of comfort. However, its presence is anything but average. And that's another really important aspect of this one. The case design itself is rather simple, but with its white G-Shock Stormtrooper look here, which is then paired with these powder blue straps, this thing's going to be an attention grabber. And that's something I've experienced in real life. A lot of people have complimented me on this one. So if you prefer a watch that's really subtle and low-key, this isn't for you. Now, originally there was a black stealth version available. In fact, that was the first ceramic version. But recently it seems to have disappeared off their site, so now it's Stormtrooper or nothing. And with the Stormtrooper case, you can either get that in blue, orange, or green. So believe it or not, when you check out the other versions, this one might actually be the most subtle version out there. So it's all relative. But all of them are going to have a similar SeaWolf compressor design, with blockish hands and indices sitting on a sunburst center dial, complete with a whole lot of printed text. Then on the very outer edge, you get a pretty wide, really wide organized chapter ring, right before the bezel. It's an older, classic, and dare I say, defining design from Zodiac's past. And if you hadn't noticed, one of the cool design touches is this very light powder blue strap, believe it or not, as this color perfectly matches that of the chapter ring in the minute hand. I've seen a lot of other watches that get the strap close to what's going on with the dial, but this is the first time I've seen a perfect match. So the color is definitely not going to be for everyone, but for the watch, it's a perfect design choice. And I think that light blue does work well as a border between the pure white of the case and the darker blue of the center, also allowing the pure white indices to come through distinctly. Now, that's the design at a glance, but there are a few specific things I want to talk about. Things that are both good and bad. First off, let's talk about the big one here, and that's going to be the case design. For some, maybe most of you, the white of the case here is going to be a huge negative. And style wise, I completely get that. In fact, that's part of the reason I actually have this. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the main reason I'm mentioning it is because a lot of people are going to look at this and at first glance think it's pretty cheap. That it looks like those swatches or some other plastic cased watch or a toy. I can already see the comments down below saying that. So I completely understand. And in some ways, I agree. But for me, one of my rules to watch collecting, and I don't know if you guys remember that whole video, but for me, one of my major rules is that I never buy a watch to impress anyone else. That you should only buy something if it's something you like and you want. So typically, I don't really care what others think about a watch I'm wearing as long as I know that it's not true. And this is not a cheap piece of plastic, it's something else entirely. So I just wanted to throw this out there because I know a lot of people are going to be thinking about it. But personally, it's not something I hold against the watch. But then there's also the build quality. Now, for the most part, it's pretty good. The watch has a great solid feel, the bezel action is great. I mean, the ceramic here does feel a little different when you're turning it, but the clickiness is awesome. However, there are a couple of hiccups here as well, such as the crown. Now, the crown is really small and hard to get a hold of. But for some reason, when you unscrew it, it doesn't always pop out all the way. At least until you start winding it, and then it does sort of pop out a little bit further. And that makes it even harder to use. And then there's the straps. Now, again, it's an odd color, completely get that. But overall, it is a really great tropic rubber strap and a good buckle. And all of that almost gets ruined by the spring bar cavity being just a little bit too wide for the spring bars they're using here. As when you pick it up, there's a little bit too much flex and wiggle to the strap. It's fine when you put it on, but it's something you definitely notice when you pick it up. And this is something that can be alleviated by maybe switching to a different spring bar or swapping straps completely. And I actually wore this one a lot on this new strap combo I got. It's a little different, but I really liked it in the end. But the main point is for this price, Zodiac, come on. And that's something you can also say about a speck of dust under the dial near the 10. If this was a cheaper watch, I wouldn't necessarily complain about it, but at almost an 1800 MSRP, come on, that's a no-no. However, one thing Zodiac did get right here is the LUME, as LUME is great, and surprisingly so. Now, I'd love it if the design was maybe a little more interesting, but what it's got here is nice and bright. And when I say that it's surprising, is that this is one of the few higher end name brand watches that seems to really get it when it comes to LUME, that it beats out a basic Seiko diver. Most other brands I've seen just seem to fall short, and that includes Seiko itself with their higher end divers, but that's a whole other story. The dial design, for the most part, is also great. It's sharp and eye catching. It is different, but the powder blue next to the darker blue center really draws you in like a bullseye. It's also easy to read and creates a very interesting mix of vintage design with something maybe a little bit modern with the white case. And I do like the two of them together. It's an interesting and sharp contrast, again, making a fun summer watch. One with a very distinct look, which is partially why I've received a lot of comments on it from just random people. It's also fairly easy to read, with all the components coming across with great contrast. And while I wouldn't necessarily say this about a normal watch design, I do like here that there's no flashy silver polished framing or anything else like it on the dial, as it would distract too much, and while it may be a little odd, the color scheme is on point. Now, that said, I do think that the wide chaptering is a little too wide, and at times does seem to throw the whole design off balance a little bit, especially with the hands making them seem a little shorter than they should be. Before we wrap this whole thing up, I think I should tell you about why I have it. So, story time. You see, late last year, a friend of mine, and I'm not sure he wants me to mention him by name, but he found a really good deal on the black version of this. And he really liked it. He really loved it. But a few weeks in, something went wrong with the movement. So he told the store he bought it from, and unfortunately, the store didn't have any more black versions. So they either offered him a refund or said he could try one of the others. He thought about it, and in the end, he decided to take a chance that he might like one of the white versions. So he ordered this one in Stormtrooper White, and unfortunately, it didn't quite vibe with him. Meanwhile, he'd been telling me about all this, and I'd been pretty curious about him. And I actually did like the look of this one. So, since he got such a great deal, I offered to buy it off him. Now, I'm telling you this for two reasons. The first of which is to point out that I didn't pay anywhere near full retail, so I'm not completely crazy. And two, the movement is something to consider with Zodiacs as well. From what I've heard, the original STP movements did have some issues, and supposedly they all got fixed and got better. Now, I haven't had any issue with this one, and if you noticed, I'm wearing my Zodiac Olympus during this review as well, and I haven't had any issue with the movement here. But I still have heard some others who have had issues, and including the whole reason I have this one. Now, I wish I was more versed in movements and could give you a real answer on if this is a good one or a bad one, but I don't. So instead, I just got to point it out and tell you that it's something to keep in mind. And that if you're going to pay a lot of money for a good watch, you should probably do a little bit of research into it. Bottom line, it's the Zodiac Super SeaWolf ceramic. There's not much else out there like it. It's an interesting, innovative watch with a bright and usable fun design. And especially for those that like white. And even though I have had some critical things to say about it, I gotta admit I like it. As many watches as I have, I don't have anything else quite like this. And I doubt I'll ever buy anything that comes close. But the thing is, the main part of a review is to offer advice to those that are interested in it. And it's really hard to ignore the fact that this is an expensive watch. One where, other than the novel ceramic shell, offers a fairly average experience. And I think that's the true takeaway message here. And as for the whole debate on whether it's innovative or gimmicky, well, honestly, I think that's only truly going to be answered in time. And it'll be decided on how well these hold up. But in the meantime, I am kind of leaning on the gimmicky side of things. Because, let's be honest, let's keep it real here, there's nothing wrong with steel. And for the price, I don't think this is going to give you much more than a brushed case with a hardened coating will in the long run. And at this point, there's a lot of watches that offer that. So unless you absolutely love the white ceramic look here, which granted is very unique, my recommendation is that you're better off spending that money on more watch than more ceramic. Or spend less and get a regular SeaWolf with a bracelet. That just seems a smarter play. But anyway, as usual, let me know your thoughts down below on the watch, on the Zodiac, or if you can think of another watch that does it better. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do something down below. Really helps the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.